and then what modern Russian Empire, so-called Russian Federation, brought to Crimea. The book contains a lot of memories about the events of the beginning of the 20th century, the operations of Crimean Tatar intelligence. We find out about the way Crimea lived in the beginning of the 20th century, in the years 20s, 30s, what languages were spoken there, what was taught in schools, how the Crimean intelligence were becoming the teachers of Crimean Tatar language in the early 20th century. And this is something that where we can draw parallels with the Ukrainians, who had a lot of aspirations and inspiration in the beginning of the 20th century, that never who had a lot of dreams that never came true. There are memories of grandfathers and grandfathers, their memories of the 18th of May 44, a lot about deportation, how the women with the children were surviving in deportation. Very sad pages, and I think that the Ukrainians will find a lot in that book that is easy to understand for them, because when there is a genocide going on against the people, we understand what it is and we remember what our grandfathers and grandmothers were telling us. Also, the book contains the memories about the fight of Crimean Tatar activists, and Crimean Tatar activists are in fact those Crimean Tatars, well, all of the Crimean Tatars, how they were fighting to return to Crimea. A lot of memories of the 90s after the Tatars returned to Crimea, what were the difficulties they were forced to overcome, about the crawling Russification, the memories of the events of the 26th of February 2014, the memories of how it was going on. Many of my protagonists were present in the square in Simferopol and were taking part directly in the protests and other protests of the Crimean Tatar women, who were building the chains with the Crimean Tatar flags and were demanding to prevent the occupation of Crimea. They were helping the Ukrainian armed units by cooking meals to them as they were blocked by the Russian troops. All those memories are in that book, and there are modern stories, the stories of yet another phase that started on the 24th of February 2022, about many of my protagonists having taken up the arms to defend the homeland, and some of them had to leave the country that became their homeland again and again and again. The Crimean Tatars had to leave their homes to look for salvation in other lands. And to finalize it, I would like to say that it's 14 stories where every reader can find something very close to them. You know, it's like talking to your grandmother or your grandfather. And I think that they will find in this book a lot of love and inspiration, because despite of all the trials and tribulations, all those people, they still believe that they will have their homes back, that they will be back in their homes, and on their path they will find and meet a lot of good people. And there are more stories that we know about, but we unfortunately cannot publish them because the loved ones of those families are defending our homeland with the arms in their hands, and we cannot disclose their names. And believe me, such heroes are numerous, and on these days we remember all those who get involved in defense of our homeland. And I would like to say, in my opinion, Ukrainian nation is responsible for preservation of the state of Ukraine and preservation of all of the indigenous people living in our territory. Thank you, Miss Yevheniia. Joining us online is one of the protagonists of this book, Miss Gulnara, who is a wife of a political prisoner. Her story and the story of her husband is included in this book. So, Miss Gulnara, can you please share your story with us? Can you please tell us why was it important for you to give publicity to your story? I'm asking our technical team to get Miss Gulnara connected. Good afternoon, can you hear me? Yes, we are hearing you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for organization of this event and for the invitation. I would like to extend my appreciation to Miss Yevheniia. She was the one who presented us this book. Thank you very much, Miss Yevheniia. Our story was pretty difficult. It's a story of a difficult way because as Miss Yevheniia was writing down the story, Adam was severely ill and she provided us with an opportunity. She was finding 20-30 minutes of Zoom to get connected and to listen to the story. I'm currently taking care of my severely ill husband. I'm getting in touch with you from Istanbul. It's been 22 months that we're in the hospital, and those are all consequences of Russian prison, where my husband spent 257 days. Miss Yevheniia provided us with the opportunity to recall our history back from the times of our grandfathers and ending with our personal stories. And everything that our parents were telling us is something that we've heard from them, but again, we walked the same path starting from 2014. My mother told me as they were deported to Ural, about the 40 degrees below zero after Crimean warmth. My father was deported to Uzbekistan as he was 13, and he was telling about those boys of 13-14 years old. They were only digging the trenches to bury the bodies of the dead of famine and illnesses. Then in 1967 there was an order that they are allowed to start coming back to Crimea, but in Crimea, unfortunately, there was no registration, there was no opportunity to buy home. The Crimean Tatars were not accepted for any employment, and whoever was buying any real estate there, they were deported once again. So this book includes the story of my father, who on the 50th anniversary of deportation on the year 94, when the stories of Crimean Tatars were open, when it was demonstrated on TV how the deportation was going on, and he was saying like, come on children, come on, see how we were tortured, all of the Crimean Tatar people, everything that we were telling you within these 50 years, Ukraine shows it now. Look how it was happening. And unfortunately on that night of the 18th of May, my father died, so it's another tragic date for us. And my mother, who survived the deportation, who experienced the return to Crimea, and just like many other people who were coming back in 67, she was not allowed to stay in Crimea, but she stayed in the border with Crimea in Ukraine, in the Yevheniia district, in Chankar Strait, and there were no Crimean Tatars until 1967, and before the beginning of the war in 2022, it was the place of compact residence of Crimean Tatars. After the beginning of the war, I was forced to leave, but then the house where my mother was living, it was searched 3 times within 10 months, and mother was forced to leave her home and to leave the country. Fortunately now she's alive, but those are the memories of what she experienced. Everything that was told by the parents are just the tales for us, but what we've seen with our own eyes on the when on the 26th of February, upon the call of Mejlis, I was member of Mejlis of Crimean Tatar people back then. We left for Simferopol, and we've joined this multi-thousand meeting and manifestation, and on the 27th the Crimean Tatar channel was on air, and we've heard that on the 27th the parliament building was already captured, and on the 28th those green men crossed Shankar, and they were entering with their tanks and troops to Chonhar, people dressed in green and black, and they were trying to capture our territory, but the people were creating the life shield, and until the 16th of May, having experienced the pressure of those enemies who came to our land, we were pressing against them to the border between Chonhar and Crimea. And with the beginning of the war, we also, it was in Novoalexeyevka, just like in Chonhar, where the tanks were entering, then to both sides, to Zaporizhia and Kherson. They were moving, and it was so, well, we were never thinking the enemy. We knew that the enemy is there. We knew that the war is going on. Donetsk was occupied, Crimea was annexed, but we couldn't expect those hundreds of tanks enter our village and to go different ways. It was a horror. So when the people started leaving from Kherson region, Zaporizhia region, from Crimea, about 70% have left, because within 8 years we were standing, we were supporting Crimea, we were walking out on protests, people were joining all of the meetings, all of the protests in support of Crimea, and they were indifferent, not indifferent to what is going on in Crimea. I don't know, this book comprises such stories that were so thoroughly, so meticulously described by Miss Yevheniia. I remember those moments when 35 years ago, when we were given a house in Novoalexeyevka, my husband was given this house as an agronomist, and our neighbor who lived nearby, she was Ukrainian, their family was deported too someday, and she was told, like, you know, Tatars are coming, you understand it, and to me they told, like, your neighbors will be Banderevцы, and she met me with borscht, and we lived side by side more than 35 years. She's a Banderevka and I'm a Crimean Tatar. We were living like a family. We didn't even have a fence between our land plots. If I'm cooking the chebureks, I'm giving the first to Miss Stefania always. And so what I want to say is that today everybody in this world has to understand, if Russia is not stopped, it destroys everything in this earth, because they're the enemy that for ages, for centuries, is oppressing Crimean Tatar people, Ukrainian people. Is their intention, is their plan to destroy everything that demonstrates any identity of any other peoples, like Crimean Tatar people or Ukrainian people. This is why we have to fight everybody in our fronts, and I want to thank Miss Yevheniia, because it's their front, it's her fight, and I would like to end with the words of Naman Khan. They can set fire on all of our land, they can destroy all of our property, but they will never destroy our faith, the faith of the Crimeans. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Gulnara, for sharing your story. Mr. Maksym, in your opinion, why is it important to document history, to tell the history of Ukraine and Crimean Tatar people through such human stories? And why did you decide to make such a book of stories, regular people's stories? I would like to mention, just like Mr. Taras said, just like Ms. Gulnara and Yevheniia said, that on the 26th of February, 10 years ago, thanks to the call of Mejlis, there was many thousand people protest that deteriorated that picture that Russia wanted to show, that the deputies of Crimea vote for separation from Ukraine and joining Russia. So thanks to those people, everybody had seen that things are not like that. And today many Crimean Tatars continue fighting for our independence, fighting for our freedom in the ranks of the armed forces of Ukraine. This is why it's very important to publish books like this, to make sure that our descendants understand and know who was defending our freedom. And the fact that this book describes the real stories of the real people, it's even more important. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Oleksandr. Folio Publishers is behind this book. How is it special for you personally and for the publishers? Let me start with a different thing. Folio, as publishers, publish the literature related to Crimean Tatar people, and I think that if we take, say, Ukrainian history and culture, it's a big tapestry where we have to redraw some distorted pictures, distorted parts to make it real. And Crimean Tatar people suffered so much terrible oppressions of their history and culture that it's the mosaic where the majority of the pieces has fallen apart, and they have to be restored, and they have to be restored for years very carefully and meticulously to make sure that we put together the whole big picture. So among other things that we've published before is the textbook of Crimean Tatar language, which is in demand among Ukrainians, first of all, not Crimean Tatars, but Ukrainians who want to learn the Crimean Tatar language, and another conversation book of Crimean Tatar language. What we plan to publish within the next year or year and a half is the translation of two main books of Crimean Tatar epos, Crimean Tatar classics, Tuhaybey and Sefernameh. Out of what we've already published in a small number of copies, 2 volumes of main classic of Crimean Tatar literature, Aspiration, and I see demand for this book in the free market already, and I'm seeing that the number of readers from different regions and those who buy remotely, I see the names and the last names. The majority of the last names are Ukrainian. Obviously, the history of Crimean Tatar people. I'm talking about relations between the two countries during the hetmanship times. It was absolutely distorted, and only now we start rediscovering this real history. And the same thing about the modern history. It turns out two peoples are working hand in hand. They have common enemies, they have common friends, and they have common future. And I think that Miss Yevheniia, it's not the last book of hers for ours. We've made new proposals for her. We're waiting for her answer, and I think that in a year or year and a half we will be sitting in this same room discussing her new book. Yeah, we hope to do that too. Thank you, dear guests. Do we have any questions to our guests, either offline or online? Oh, can I ask a question from Miss Yevheniia, who is joining us online? Yeah, help the journalists anyway. Well, I would like to ask, how was the presentation of the book in Istanbul? I would like to ask our technical team to get Miss Yevheniia connected back to us. Miss Yevheniia, how was it in Istanbul? Oh, hello once again. Thank you very much for this question, Mr. Oleksandr. Just yesterday in the night we had a presentation in Istanbul, from where we're joining you with Miss Gulnara online, and I would like to appreciate the input of General Consulate of Ukraine in Istanbul for the organization. There was a very warm meeting. We had representatives of Crimean Tatar community who are living in Turkey since the beginning, or since like the first half of the 20th century, one of the branches of Crimean Tatar people who had to leave Crimea to save their lives here in Turkey. So they were visiting us yesterday. They were sharing their memories, the memories of their families during the meeting. Also attending us were many representatives of Ukrainian community who were forced to leave for Turkey due to the full-scale war, and they were all pleased to join our presentation. We had a lot to share with them, our memories, our stories about how it was happening, how it was going on. There were tears and hugs, but it was all very warm, and we were saying that those memories are real timely and everybody understands them, specifically now. Unfortunately, it's terrible that we become closer due to such terrible events, but on the other hand, it adds more compassion and some joint emotions. We were disseminating the books, and I hope there will be more demand for them, and we were saying that we have to continue it in some way. So thank you, Ms. Yevheniia. Are there any proposals about translation of the book in other languages? Well, for what I know, there are such thoughts to have it translated into Turkish, and the Crimean Tatar community here in Turkey were discussing this, because in Turkish language it will be real good, because the Turkish are interested in this topic, and the Crimean Tatars can speak Turkish pretty easily, so probably even on the level of the ministry, or I don't know how to make it better, it would be real cool to translate this book, because we've heard such opinions yesterday that it would be interested. So yeah, I want to add a couple of words that the matter of translation into both Turkish and English is being discussed, and it will be solved within the next couple of months. Thank you very much. Let me remind you, we had a presentation of the book called Crimean Tatar Families. We all remember that Crimea is Ukraine. It was always, and it will be, and we will be back on air at 1300. We will be talking about blocking in Polish borders. Stay tuned.